Mercedes have been here before. In 2014, they entered a new power unit era, having interpreted the regulations more effectively than anyone else, creating a competitive imbalance that reshaped Formula One for years, entirely within the rules but devastating in consequence. Now, with the first images of the W17, there is growing unease inside the paddock that Mercedes may be repeating the process. This time not just through the power unit, but through the entire car concept. The timing is not coincidental. Mercedes enter 2026 already under scrutiny over power unit interpretation, with rivals questioning whether they have found a way to operate at higher effective compression ratios than the nominal 16:1 ceiling. A debate serious enough to trigger FIA technical meetings. And now, layered on top of that, comes a launch car whose aerodynamic architecture openly rejects the grid-wide consensus. The W17 sidepods narrow sharply at the inlet and then rise again towards the rear, diverging from the aggressive downwashing solutions most teams have adopted. This is not cosmetic differentiation. It signals a fundamentally different reading of how the new regulations reward airflow management. What makes this more uncomfortable for rivals is that Mercedes' past dominance was never about isolated components. It was about building an entire performance system around a regulatory interpretation others had missed. The concern now is that the same pattern may be unfolding. Controversial power unit positioning on one side, unconventional aero and chassis architecture on the other, both pointing towards a team that believes it has already solved the 2026 rulebook. The W17 therefore does not look like a conservative launch car. It looks like a calculated one. And in Formula One, calculation is often more dangerous than innovation. Is the W17 the car that could repeat Mercedes' 2014 style dominance, but this time with no one ready to stop it? If you want the full answer, make sure you're subscribed and let's break it down. The first strand of this story is the power unit controversy that has quietly intensified in recent weeks. Ahead of the new engine era, Ferrari, Audi and Honda have raised concerns that Mercedes, and Red Bull, may have found a way to operate their combustion engines at effective compression ratios higher than the 16:1 ceiling, nominally written into the regulations. The dispute centres on how that limit is measured, with Mercedes arguing that compliance is based on readings taken at ambient temperature rather than under full operating conditions. The issue escalated to the point where the FIA convened technical meetings with manufacturers to discuss whether the regulations require clarification. FIA single-seater director Nicholas Tombazis framed the situation carefully, saying, "When we have new regulations, I think it is normal that there will be some discussion points, some areas which need a bit of clarification or adjustment, and that's what we are currently discussing with the various stakeholders. We have an objective to make sure that procedures are interpreted and understood in the same way. We are confident the rules can be clarified, and I would say that I'm sure it will no longer be a talking point very soon." That language is measured, but the existence of the meeting itself signals how sensitive the issue has become. Engine manufacturers are not typically inclined to air grievances publicly unless they believe a meaningful performance gap is forming. Audi F1 project leader Mattia Binotto was blunt about the challenge of closing such gaps once power unit architectures diverge. "It's simply we are trying all together to really develop a methodology where we can measure it in real time while the car is running," he said. "My hope in that meeting is not clarity on the regulation itself, but more to define a methodology for the future." Behind that diplomatic phrasing sits a more uncomfortable truth. In modern Formula One, power unit development, catching up is slow, expensive, and structurally difficult. Red Bull Powertrain's technical director Ben Hodgkinson explained that power unit ideas take months to gestate, validate, and introduce into the race pool. "The bit that I don't think is fully understood amongst the rulemakers is that the gestation time of an idea in power units is much longer than it is for the chassis," he said. "If I need to make a change, firstly, I've not just got 2 cars to update, I've got a whole fleet of engines in the pool. That takes time." He added that even if rivals knew exactly what Mercedes were doing, which they do not, it could take 6 months to introduce meaningful changes. "I think that if a team has an advantage on the power unit in race 1, it's going to take some time before anyone else can catch up," Hodgkinson said. "So a way to peg them back is kind of what's necessary, but I think that it's quite challenging to come up with an update in a couple of weeks." Those comments echo uncomfortably with memories of 2014, when Mercedes' early power unit advantage was not merely performance-based, but architectural, and therefore structurally difficult to erode. Rivals eventually closed the gap, but not before several seasons had passed and the competitive order had been decisively shaped. This is why the current compression ratio controversy matters so much. It is not about a marginal horsepower gain. It is about whether Mercedes, again, have interpreted the rules in a way that unlocks performance others cannot quickly replicate. And while the FIA may yet clarify the regulations, the underlying concern remains. Any advantage baked into early power unit architecture could persist well into the life cycle of the new regulations. Against that backdrop, the W17's unconventional aerodynamic architecture feels less like coincidence and more like corroboration. When a team under scrutiny for regulatory interpretation on the power unit side simultaneously unveils a chassis concept that diverges sharply from the aerodynamic mainstream, it invites an uncomfortable question. Are these separate innovations or parts of a single integrated performance strategy? The sidepod geometry is the most obvious visual marker. While most teams appear to be converging on aggressive downwashing bodywork, collapsing the sidepod volume towards the rear to energize airflow into the diffuser, Mercedes have chosen to lift the bodywork again behind the inlet, reshaping how airflow interacts with the Coke bottle region and rear floor. This is not a surface-level styling decision. It fundamentally alters the pressure distribution around the sidepod and the behavior of airflow feeding the underfloor and diffuser throat. Such a choice suggests Mercedes are optimizing for airflow stability and consistency rather than peak diffuser mass flow. That distinction becomes critical under the 2026 regulations, which introduce active aerodynamics, remove DRS, and reduce overall reliance on pure downforce generation in favor of efficiency and controllability. If Mercedes believe they can deliver a more stable aerodynamic platform across ride heights, yaw conditions, and energy deployment phases that could offer systemic performance advantages that are difficult to copy without rethinking the entire car concept. That idea aligns closely with Toto Wolff's framing of the W17 program. At the launch, he said, "Formula One will undergo significant change in 2026, and we are prepared for that transition. The new regulations demand innovation and absolute focus across every area of performance. Our work on the new car and the long-term development of the power unit and advanced sustainable fuels with Petronas reflects that approach." He added that releasing the first images of the W17 represents the collective, sustained effort of our teams in Brixworth and Brackley. We will continue to push hard in the months ahead. That emphasis on sustained cross-departmental effort is telling. Mercedes' greatest competitive strength during the hybrid era was not any single department, but their ability to integrate power unit architecture, cooling layout, chassis packaging, aerodynamic platform and operational execution into a coherent system. The 2026 regulations, with their unprecedented interdependence between electrical deployment, energy recovery, aerodynamics and active aero, reward precisely that kind of integration. The new power units remove the MGU-H, dramatically increase MGU-K output to 350 kilowatts, and mandate 100% sustainable fuels. These changes shift performance emphasis towards energy efficiency, combustion optimization, software control, and deployment strategy. As Hodgkinson observed, the ERS side, I think everyone will be 99% efficient on their power electronics and motor. The best combustion engines last season were around 50% efficiency, so there is still quite a lot to go at. Haas technical director Andrea De Zordo reinforced the point, saying, "Initially with the PU, as it's all so new, there is not necessarily more to gain, but a lot more to lose if you don't do well. To understand how it works and how to maximize that will probably be the most important part." Those comments underline why Mercedes' power unit positioning has attracted such scrutiny. In a regulatory environment where combustion efficiency and energy deployment become the primary differentiators, early architectural advantages can snowball rapidly. And if Mercedes have aligned their chassis and aero concept around a specific power unit philosophy, rather than treating those areas as modular or independent, then their advantage becomes structural rather than incremental. The W17 sidepod concept appears to reflect exactly that kind of system-level thinking. Instead of maximizing local aerodynamic load, it appears designed to manage airflow behavior in a way that complements underfloor performance, cooling efficiency, and energy deployment strategies. That would not be unusual for Mercedes. In 2014, their power unit architecture reshaped their entire car layout, enabling tighter packaging, improved cooling efficiency, and more aggressive aerodynamic solutions solutions downstream. The current fear inside the paddock is that something similar may be unfolding again, but with both power unit and aero being interpreted in tandem. This is where the broader operational context becomes relevant. Mercedes have recently announced a multi-year partnership with Microsoft, embedding Azure Cloud and Enterprise AI technologies into their race operations, simulation workflows, and real-time performance modeling. Each Mercedes car carries more than 400 sensors, generating over 1.1 million data points per second, feeding into systems that inform strategy, performance analysis, and development direction. Microsoft's Judson Althoff described the partnership as putting cloud and enterprise AI technologies at the heart of racing performance, where milliseconds matter and data determines outcomes. While such partnerships are not unusual in modern Formula One, the scale and depth of integration described by Mercedes suggest an organizational focus on data-driven optimization at a level that aligns closely with the demands of the 2026 regulations. Managing active aerodynamics, electrical deployment, energy harvesting, and combustion efficiency in real time requires predictive modeling, simulation integration, and operational agility. If Mercedes have built their W17 concept around that digital infrastructure, then the car's unconventional physical architecture may be only one visible expression of a much deeper systems advantage. This is not to suggest that Mercedes are breaking the rules. On the contrary, every indication is that their interpretations are legal, just as their 2014 solutions were legal. But legality does not equate to parity. Formula One history shows that regulatory frameworks often contain latent performance pathways that only become obvious once one team has already exploited them. And by the time rivals understand what has happened, the gap can be prohibitively difficult to close. That dynamic is precisely what unnerves Mercedes' competitors now. The compression ratio controversy suggests a power unit interpretation that others did not anticipate. The W17's sidepod geometry suggests an aerodynamic interpretation that diverges sharply from the grid's consensus. And Toto Wolff's messaging suggests a team confident in its long-term systems integration rather than reliant on short-term development swings. Taken together, these signals point not to experimentation, but to conviction. The W17 launch therefore feels less like a routine unveiling and more like a turning point. Not because the car looks extreme, but because it looks resolved. Resolved in its packaging, resolved in its aero architecture, resolved in its integration philosophy. Those qualities rarely appear in isolation. They typically emerge when a team believes it understands not just what the regulations allow, but what they reward. It is also telling that Mercedes have retained continuity in their driver lineup, with George Russell and Andrea Kimi Antonelli both returning for 2026. Russell in particular enters the new era widely regarded as ready for his first genuine title challenge, having delivered consistently strong performances since joining Mercedes in 2022, despite not being given a consistently front-running car. Antonelli, meanwhile, finished his rookie season strongly after a difficult mid-season period. That continuity allows Mercedes to focus entirely on extracting performance from their technical platform rather than managing integration risk in the cockpit. Another small but meaningful advantage in a season defined by systemic change. Yet none of this guarantees dominance. Formula One remains brutally competitive, and regulatory resets often produce unpredictable outcomes. The W17's unusual aero concept may ultimately prove flawed. The power unit controversy may be resolved in ways that neutralize any early advantage. Rivals may discover alternative interpretations that converge or even surpass Mercedes' solutions. But the unease surrounding the W17 stems not from certainty, but from probability, from the recognition that Mercedes have historically been most dangerous when they appear understated, integrated, and quietly confident at the dawn of a new regulatory era. And it is difficult to escape the parallels. In 2014, Mercedes entered the season without overt hype, without radical-looking cars, and without public claims of superiority. Yet within a handful of races, it became clear that the competitive order had fundamentally shifted. Rivals were left not chasing lap time, but chasing understanding, trying to reverse engineer a philosophy rather than simply outdevelop a car. The fear now is that the W17 represents the same kind of moment. Not a dramatic breakthrough, but a quiet confirmation that one team has already solved a problem others are still trying to define. The compression ratio debate hints at a power unit interpretation gap. The sidepod geometry hints at an aerodynamic philosophy gap. And Mercedes' operational infrastructure hints at a systems integration gap. None of these alone would justify alarm. Together, they paint a picture that rivals cannot afford to ignore. This is why the paddock reaction to the W17 has been cautious rather than dismissive. Teams are not scoffing at the design. They are studying it. They are not mocking the power unit controversy. They are lobbying for clarification. They are not reacting publicly, but they are watching closely because they remember what happened last time Mercedes found themselves at the center of a regulatory grey area at the dawn of a new era. And perhaps that is the most unsettling aspect of all. Mercedes are not promising dominance. They are not selling revolution. They are not drawing attention to themselves. They are simply doing what they have always done when they believe they understand the regulations better than anyone else. Working quietly, speaking cautiously, and letting the architecture speak for itself. So the question is no longer whether the W17 looks radical. It does not. The question is whether it looks resolved. And in Formula One, resolution at the beginning of a regulatory cycle often matters more than brilliance. Is Mercedes about to repeat 2014, not through overt superiority, but through a regulatory interpretation gap that others cannot realistically close? Or are rivals right to believe this time the field will converge faster, the FIA will intervene sooner, and the playing field will remain level? Let me know what you think in the comments.